All right, David, welcome to the Founding AE podcast. I'm super excited to have you on today.
Thanks so much, Justin. Yep, really excited to be here.
Awesome, awesome. Well, lots that I want to unpack with you, especially I think you're one of the first founding AEs that I'm speaking to from Europe, right? Not from the US. So I'm really interested in hearing what the ecosystem is, the startup ecosystem and all that. But before we do that, for those that maybe aren't familiar with you, maybe give us a little bit about your background and how you made your way into the world of early stage sales.
Yeah, sure. I'll give you the brief version because I've done quite a few different jobs. But essentially, originally I'm from the UK. Now I've been living in Spain for the past 10 years. I started out I was a musician for a while. So I used to play guitar in various bands and taught guitar as well for a while. I realized that that's not the best way to make a living. It's very hard. So I then retrained as a lawyer. I went back to law school, did my qualifications, and then I worked doing commercial litigation for a couple of years. And then I switched and I did human rights law for a couple of years after that. And then I moved over to Spain. I kind of just decided that legal practice wasn't really for me. And I'd always wanted to live abroad. I'm someone who likes being outdoors, and being in a better weather than Northern England is something that works for me. So having no kind of Spanish legal background or not really speaking any Spanish at the time, I had to kind of pivot and do something else. And honestly, I just kind of fell into doing sales. I started off the way a lot of people do, which is just kind of picking up the phone, doing the type of BDR, appointment setting, lead generation, that type of thing. And then eventually, started working at Typeform about 18 months after kind of doing the sort of the BDR stuff, which is, I guess, is where it gets a little bit more interesting.
Very cool. Yeah, I noticed your legal background. I was checking out your LinkedIn and I was going to ask you about that. But I didn't know the music side. That's really cool as well. I'm curious, uh, any of those experiences, when I talk to founding AEs, I'm always interested in hearing what sort of backgrounds they come from. And it sounds like, yeah, from what I've experienced, there's so many different backgrounds that get into the founding AE role. I've talked to people that come from, marketing backgrounds, from product and engineering backgrounds. Now, somebody that comes from a legal background. Any of those experiences, both in the legal space, but also music, right? That have contributed to how you think about startups, early stage sales, or anything like that?
Yeah, I would say definitely. There's some kind of really nice parallels and some skills that I picked up during my legal work and training that I found really useful. The first one would definitely be being organized. You can't, when you're running a caseload of litigation, you can't miss a date. You can't not do what the judge tells you to do. You always have to be organized, and you always have to make sure that you follow up on time and that you're kind of on top of everything. So that's definitely something that I really like. From a more holistic point of view, I think spending your time understanding people's stories, kind of translating those complex requirements and against the background of maybe like different types of regulatory frameworks or technical perspectives that they have within their own company. That's something that I've found from explaining kind of different legal situations and different regulations. I found something there that's been like super useful that I've been able to take with me. And it's definitely made me a bit more consultative in the sense of I like to kind of dig into the sort of the details. And I'm comfortable with ambiguity as well. There's always like a lot of things are always up in the air when you're doing legal work. And similarly with sort of early stage sales, you never really know what's going to happen next sometimes. So that's something that it's made me really comfortable with that as well too.
Totally. I actually think that I could have benefited from a legal background when I first did my first startup sales job. We were selling enterprise agreements, and the procurement process, the legal processes were also pretty heavy. And being an early stage startup, we didn't necessarily have we had a sort of outside counsel that we'd bring in when we really, really needed them, but we would try and like get past as much as we could. So knowing the law a little bit better, I think could have helped me out in that. Your time at Typeform really stood out to me when I was checking out your background. because it's not usual that I see somebody that has spent 7 years or 7 or more years, right, at a startup. That's really a lifetime in the startup world. So you must have gone through a lot of growth there. That company grew a lot, and I'm curious to hear a little bit more about that experience. What was it that kept you there for so many years, and how have you taken that experience of going through like rapid growth over that period of time to now starting at a company 0 to 1?
Yeah, it was as effectively Typeform was like my sales MBA, I guess. And when I joined, there were about 150 people there, but that was all PLG. They just had like this really well-oiled PLG motion, and I was the second person in the sales team. So they wanted to kind of ramp up some type of enterprise sales and do a little bit more on that side. So when I joined the company, obviously it wasn't built for kind of those types of sales. I remember when I first signed up the first few customers, I had to use my own credit card details to kind of upgrade them in the back end on the payment system and do all sorts of crazy workarounds. So it meant that we were kind of creating structure inside an organization that wasn't necessarily set up for that. So doing things like the typical like qualification and doing the pricing for the enterprise sales, forecasting, handoffs to CS, feedback to product. We were just building all that and kind of retrofitting it, I think, into the organization rather than at Invopop now. We're kind of building it all up at the same time as we go along. So yeah, it was incredibly interesting. I think we were at about 9 million ARR when I started, and just touching 100 maybe when I left. So having stayed there for so long, and the amount of changes that I've seen, and the type of clients that we started dealing with at first, and the ones that we were signing up by the end, the experience was just completely invaluable. Yeah, in terms of what kept me there for so long, I guess I was just learning constantly. We went through a few different funding rounds. I saw like the customer base grow. I saw the marketing and the sales teams grow. Input in things like sales enablement and RevOps teams, how they were kind of added on and how all that worked. So it was an incredible learning experience. And I think being able to just learn those new things all the time was the main reason that I stayed.
Yeah, I can imagine that growth must have been wild. And I was at a startup for 10 years. So I'm also one of the rare ones out there that has stayed. We didn't go through the level of growth that you went through there, but still pretty good. I joined when we were probably like 50K ARR. So like really, really early, 13th employee, first salesperson. And then when I left, we were at just over 10 million ARR. And I think now the company's at like 20 something. So same thing that kept me there. Like there's so much that you can learn. Every time that I thought like I was getting, used to the new normal, there was a new normal that I had to get used to. And there's just so much to learn. But with Typeform, what I was interested in as well was when I think of Typeform, I do think of the PLG motion. So, I wanted to ask you about like that experience of sort of tacking a sales motion on top of the PLG motion, what you learned in that experience, and maybe as you think about Invopop or other experiences, what can you take from that and apply into your new role?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think building within a PLG motion definitely gave me a more of a kind of a customer first approach. Gave me a lot of empathy for the customers as well, because it wasn't initially kind of it wasn't like we had to scale up a lot of outbound from nowhere. We had this like huge customer base already that we could kind of tap into. So it was really more just about figuring out the customers within that existing customer base, like how we can help them more, like how we can kind of help them grow with their use of Typeform. The product itself is super horizontal, so you might buy it to initially just say customer surveys, but then you can do it for things like recruiting or like HR employee feedback, or you can do it for your lead generation. So there was lots and lots of different use cases that you could touch across the business. So lots of it was about figuring out how to kind of go to market in the different across different personas within our existing customers. So that was super interesting, building playbooks for all of the different types of people that we might need to speak to. Other things that I loved about the PLG motion, I don't know where to start. I guess because the product was quite mature, we already had a little bit of like brand recognition. So when you're speaking to customers, they already kind of had an idea about the company, about what you're doing. They'd either filled out a Typeform themselves, or they had colleagues who'd done it, and so that was super useful in that sense. And obviously, we had like a really well-oiled marketing machine, so it was a case of kind of adding, when we'd spoken to customers about like enterprise and about what they needed from that, it was giving the feedback to the marketing team, and then allowing them to then kind of use that to go and pitch enterprise products at sort of this different market segment that we were aiming at.
Yeah, I think, one thing that's interesting about PLG, I feel like a lot of people think it's either or, right? It's either PLG or it's sales led. And
Yeah.
what I've experienced at least is this like beautiful middle, which is PLG, product led sales assist, right? And there's so much value that you get. You touched on a lot of this, right? Like now you're not just doing cold outbound, but you're speaking to people that are already getting value out of your product, and the pitch changes to, there's that brand recognition, there's that credibility, there's that trust, and now it's like, how can we help you further? Like, what other use cases can you benefit from using this product, which is a whole different ball game than just being pure cold calling, right? And on the other side of the coin, I think not all companies, I mean, there's definitely some success stories out there of pure PLG products or companies, but I feel like a lot of companies that just leave it to the PLG, they miss out on opportunities, right? That opportunity to cross sell to different use cases, to different teams, and so on. They're leaving money on the table. So I think that medium there, and that experience that you got sort of with the product led sales assist is so invaluable. So very cool on that front. How about leaving Typeform? I mean, 7 years there, rapid growth. You mentioned sort of like to just under 100 million. What was the thinking around? You know what? I'm ready to leave this rocket ship and join a sort of ground zero as the founding AE.
I guess I wanted to be uncomfortable again. By the time I left Typeform, everything was set up. We had everything in place. We had different levels of management were in place. We had lots of different marketing teams. We had product marketing managers for like enterprise products. We had sales enablements and RevOps and everything, like a huge Salesforce instance. Everything was kind of done. When I first joined, we were using like Google Sheets to set up the CRM, and it was a totally different ball game. So I felt like I kind of seen 10x growth in the company in 7 years. So much change. I felt like I'd learned as much as I could, and it was time to maybe kind of take that leap and make myself be uncomfortable again. And Invopop just offered me, a fantastic opportunity. It's a really deeply technical, smart founding team that we've got there, and they're solving a really complex and inevitable type of problem that's kind of regulation bound. So the risk felt worth it because I feel like I can make an impact really from day one.
Yeah, and I feel like that's the trait right there that you speak of the founding AE. There's many different traits, but one that I always think of is that builder mentality, that everything's built, like even though it's easier now maybe to close deals, and you're closing bigger deals and the commission checks are bigger, and you've got the brand recognition and all that stuff. It's like that missing piece, which is the building, right? Figuring out how to connect the dots instead of them already being connected is a trait that I've seen in many founding AEs that just need that chase, right? But yeah, let's dive a little bit into the Invopop experience, and specifically what I wanted to ask you about was Spain as startup ecosystem. We hear, I live in in the San Francisco Bay Area. So here, obviously, it's everywhere you go. You go to a coffee shop, people are talking about AI agents, you know, at the table next to you and what they're building. You're from the UK, you know, I know London has a very strong startup scene as well. Spain is not something that I've heard as much. So what is it like there in terms of the startup ecosystem? And specifically when it comes to like being a founding AE, have you found other early stage salespeople as well that you've been able to connect with?
So in Spain, it's largely just focused on Madrid and Barcelona. There's other bits and pieces, but they're the two hubs. I think the level of talent is outstanding. It truly is. Things like the engineering talent, design, like the products that are crafted here are just absolutely superb, really world class. I think the main difference between, say, somewhere like London or the States is maybe in sort of the depth of talent. There's not as many people, and perhaps people historically work in like larger, more traditional industries. So the tech scenes are obviously a little bit more nascent here than they're not quite as established as they are elsewhere. And consequently, things like the capital environment moves a bit more slowly. Like rounds take a bit longer, valuations can be a little bit more conservative. So that shapes maybe how companies are allowed to grow in Spain. A lot of Spanish companies will tend to go to London or New York or the Bay Area to raise a round if they can't necessarily do it locally. But what I have found is that it creates businesses that are a lot leaner and a lot more deliberate about what they're building. So that when you do get into a place to scale, you really then have got like such solid foundations that you can really start taking off and really grow.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And I think what I'm starting to see is more and more companies, uh, successful companies growing outside of those core cities that you mentioned, right? The Bay Area, New York, London, new sort of startup hubs are starting to form. So it's really exciting to see that. I think one unique challenge that you guys have over in Europe, and I think London, England has this as well, because you might be selling into broader Europe that we don't have necessarily here in the US, is just how you're selling into different cultures, into different legal environments and stuff like that. And I was taking a look a little bit at Invopop, and I think you're taking it even more to the extreme, right, with the different compliance and different places that you're selling into and what you're selling. But can maybe you speak a little bit about that in your experience? Like, how do you approach selling a product into these? Europe is, you know, a collection of all these different countries that have different, not just maybe different legal systems or different currency. Oh no, I guess in the currencies are mostly the same, but the cultures are very different, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're selling to Spanish people versus people in England versus in like Scandinavian countries, culturally it's very different. Like, how do you deal with that? Is it just learning as you go, or yeah, what's that experience like?
Yeah, it's super interesting. Obviously, I've spent my whole sales career selling all across Europe, and I definitely agree to an extent with what you're saying about the different cultures affecting how people buy. You might get in the likes of the Netherlands or Scandinavia, maybe they're a little bit more kind of abrupt, and they'll not abrupt necessarily, but they'll tell you what they think, and they don't leave you any doubt in where they stand, which is great. Like I quite like dealing with people like that, and you kind of know where you are. Whereas it's more maybe relationship based in kind of Southern Europe. But what you're essentially doing is you're trying to solve the same problems, especially with Invopop. Every companies, they're all facing these same compliance pressures that are regulatory driven. So I think what changes is more just about how the way that you earn the trust of the buyers. So for example, in places like Germany, they like to operate a little bit more, this is broadly speaking, again, not everybody, but more from kind of like first principles. So rather than pitching them like the overarching vision, you're showing them the sort of the details, and you're working from this is A, B, C, 3, all the way through to Z at the end. And you have to kind of go through all of the details and step by steps, and then you show them like the picture that you're trying to paint at the end. Whereas some other markets, I think as well in the UK, I would include that, they you can sell them the vision first, and then if the vision resonates, then you kind of start digging into the details. So it really sort of depends on, yeah, not necessarily always just the culture that you're selling into, but also like the actual product you're selling, because I guess with the sort of the compliance pressures that are driving people to look at e-invoicing and Invopop, that's something again that also creates a sense of urgency. So maybe that changes how people approach things internally as well too.
Do you find that certain countries or cultures in Europe have a different take on buying from a startup, a different risk level or risk tolerance? So, like, are there certain areas that they're very open to it? They like to be the first to adopt stuff versus other places that are very hands off, and you have to have maybe some proof points, maybe some local companies, well-known companies that are using you, where case studies and things like that are more important.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think that when we're selling to other SaaS companies, they're way more open to working with smaller companies. They're more willing to take a bet. When you're selling to like larger institutional types of businesses that have been around for generations, things move much more slowly. I don't know if that's peculiar to Europe. I guess you could tell me about whether that's something that I guess happens in the US as well too. But yeah, the types of businesses that we're selling to, they tend to be other SaaS companies. Is drives a lot of our business, like marketplaces, people who are like vertical SaaS products and need compliance layers fitted within their own software, their invoicing modules that they might have in their software. So there are already people who are used to working with things like APIs. They expect modern like systems, and that's what we produced. So that side of things, I think, hasn't been really as challenging as you might think. You are definitely, with the caveat that in Europe, you always have to jump through kind of legal privacy security hoops because the likes of GDPR and these types of data protection measures, that just happens regardless. It happened in Typeform to quite a large extent, and it's it's gonna happen here as well in Invopop.
Yeah, yeah. I think, asking about the US, it's not too dissimilar. I mean, it's definitely industry based, right? If you're selling into SaaS and tech, it's going to be a lot easier than if you're selling into healthcare or fintech or, more conservative industries where compliance is a big deal, right? That being said, I do feel like AI has shifted things a little bit where there is this pressure even from the senior level of organizations to start adopting AI and exploring with it and so on. So there's a little bit of this fuzzy ground right now, gray area right now, where I've seen even companies in industries that traditionally might have been a little apprehensive to adopt technology, maybe little pockets of testing and stuff like that. So it'll be interesting to see how that continues to evolve. Um, at your experience at Invopop so far, it sounds like you were early at Typeform, second salesperson. Feels like maybe you're earlier at Invopop in terms of being the founding salesperson and at the stage of the company. Any surprises so far, both in terms of like challenges or opportunities that you weren't sort of expecting going in that you've sort of experienced so far?
I think I was expecting the technical complexity of the product. It's essentially just a developer API. So I was expecting that side of things and having to kind of dig into the details of how all that worked, which was something that I did quite a bit at Typeform anyway. And I like that sort of technical side and having those discussions. So I was really looking forward to that. The main thing that I found different or wasn't so much expecting was the different regulations across the different countries. You tend to think that in the EU, like you sell into the EU, and maybe culturally you might have different ways of selling into France or Spain or Germany, wherever that is. But the regulatory environment is supposed to be like harmonized, and that's just not the case at all with what we're selling. Every single country has slightly different ways of implementing it, and they do it in a different way on a different time scale, with different technical requirements. So learning that whole environment and that we're operating in, that's something that I maybe underestimated a little bit, how much that was going to affect kind of what I'm doing.
Yeah, I think though on the other side of the coin, that is like what an experience, what a skill set to
Mm.
build. If I think about, uh, people ourselves as brands, right? And you think about your future and trying to sort of sell yourself into a future organization, having that as a moat that you've experienced that and you know how to navigate that is incredible. So very, very cool. We have a lot of people on this that listen to this podcast that are sort of wanting to try the founding sales experience, whether they come from a different industry, like a legal background like you, or they're at the rocket ship start, scale up, let's say the, 50, 100 million. And they're sort of thinking, that sounds interesting, building from the ground up, any advice that you would give them, on how to think about it, how to decide if it's right for them?
How to decide if it's right for you? You have to be very comfortable with ambiguity. There's no processes in place. You have to come in and see what needs doing, prioritize them, and then just start. You just have to start building, and then you can iterate as you go along. But you're not going to be in a place where you can just get everything perfect the first time. You just have to constantly change and be able to change direction and not worry about it. You have to choose your founders well. I'm really lucky
Mm.
at the two founders that I've found at Invopop. You need to find people who trust sales. Sometimes you can get situations that I've heard from friends that I know, where you go into a company and maybe they don't really trust the salespeople, or they feel like sales is a little bit of a necessary evil. And ideally, you want to be somewhere where they trust sales, and they're going to take your feedback on board, and you're going to get the opportunity to provide some inputs and have an impact. Make sure that you document everything. You have to be somebody who's definitely organized in that sense, because even if it's all in your head, there are going to be people who are coming after you, and hopefully there'll be more hires and the team will grow. You need to be able to ramp up other salespeople quickly. You need to show them how the processes work, how the CRM works, what your sales stages are like, all of these different types of things. So yeah, I guess that off the top of my head, they're the type of
Yeah,
things that I.
lots to think about and consider, but all exciting stuff if you're a builder at heart, which I think is the key here. David, this has been awesome. Thanks so much for taking the time to come on, share your experience. What an experience, right? Coming from
Yeah.
outside of tech to in tech to scale up to startup. If folks are listening to this, and again, people thinking about taking on the founding AE role, they want to ask you questions, they want to learn from you. Maybe they're interested in learning about Invopop. Where's the best place for them to find you and connect with you?
Yeah, please feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. I'm David Jones at Invopop. I'm the only salesperson there, so you should be easy enough to find me. Yeah, and just drop me a line, drop me a message. Always happy to chat, grab a virtual coffee or a real one if you're in Madrid.
Awesome. Well, David, thanks again for your time today, and have a great rest of your day over there.
Cheers, Justin. Thanks so much for having me on. Yeah, it's been really fun.